With the completion of the Babylonia anime series, it's time to return for some lore. Welcome back to Otaku Daikun, Dai here. If you've been watching my videos in order of release, you might be thinking you've missed the lore of Camelot. You haven't. As I said in the America Singularity, I'm waiting for that to get animated so I can make a more visually impressive video. So yeah, I'm skipping Camelot until those films get released. But rest assured I'll deliver the goods eventually. As usual, this is both a summary and lore-oriented commentary on the Babylonia Singularity. To recap what's been going on so far, we, Ritsuka Fujimaru, have been ray-shifting to singularities of the past to resolve them. Each one is a grail that the demon god Hivemind Getia placed as part of its plan to incinerate humanity as fuel to return to the origin of man and fix humanity. They've been masking themselves as their former master, King Solomon, and each of those singularities needs to be resolved if we want to have any hope of defeating him. So yeah, we ray-shift to a singularity, retrieve the grail Getia put there, and return home, where we wait for Chaldea to prepare to send us even further back in time. Last time, we resolved the Camelot Singularity, though it was technically more a mix between Egypt and Jerusalem. Normally, the distortion to history is caused by the actions of whomever finds Solomon's Grail, but that wasn't the case this time. Long story short, in a parallel universe, Artoria Pendragon's knight, Bedivere, decided not to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake, which prevented Artoria from dying. The longer she lived while in possession of her lance Rongominiad, the more well-endowed she became, and she ultimately turned into a goddess who wandered between worlds. She came upon this singularity in our world and decided that defeating Solomon would be impossible. So instead, she created a new Camelot as a fortress capable of enduring the incineration, only allowing a select few into the city. She thought she was doing good for humanity, but obviously we didn't agree. Only after her Bedivere sacrificed himself to destroy Rongominiad did Artoria believe in Chaldea's potential, and told Ritsuka that they need all 7 grails to reach where Solomon's hiding, a grand temple outside the flow of time. As a plus, Mashu finally figured out that the servant inhabiting her body was none other than Galahad, a knight of the Round Table, specifically Lancelot's son. The true name of her noble phantasm is Lord Camelot. Of course, if you've been watching my video series, you already knew that. Ultimately, Camelot was just the 6th in a set of 7 singularities. With it completed, it's time to prepare to go back even further in time, to Mesopotamia in 2655 BC. The cause of the singularity is pretty simple. Getia brought forth the primordial Mesopotamian goddess Tiamat using the 7th Grail. According to Sumerian mythology, Tiamat and her lover Abzu were gods of the sea, Tiamat being saltwater, while Abzu was freshwater. Together, they filled the chaotic void with primeval waters, birthing the elder gods, Lamu and Lahamu, who in turn parented the other gods in the pantheon. In time, however, conflict ensued between Abzu and his divine children. Abzu tried to suppress their tumultuous noise, and they rebelled against him. Tiamat watched over her children as they defeated Abzu, demonstrating how her maternal love eclipsed even the love she held for her husband. Sadly, as her child and consort Kingu alerted her to, these beloved children turned their weapons upon her. To fight back in a godly showdown, she fashioned 11 magical beasts from her former children, including Lamu, and yet she and her beasts lost, being torn apart. Tiamat was separated to form the heavens and the earth, giving rise to humanity. She was treated as a womb for humanity, and was ultimately banished from the world to its reverse side, more specifically to a lifeless sector called the World of Imaginary Numbers. It should go without saying that she's an angry mama who's been yearning to return to the world of man to wreak havoc. Deep down, she's quite sincere, fearing the idea of her children leaving her, but in practice, her actions are quite terrifying. As such, she is classified as one of humanity's greatest evils, a beast of calamity, just like Getia. Consider them a natural counterpart to the human order, one that the throne of heroes exists to repel with heroic spirits, chief among them the Grand Servants. Tiamat is the second of these beasts, and pulling her from the world of imaginary numbers brought forth the greatest threat humanity has ever faced. This is where Gilgamesh came in. Being one of Fate's most iconic servants, he shouldn't need much introduction, but I'll say what's relevant. Gilgamesh was born as a demigod to serve as a mediator between the gods and man, and yet he turned on the gods and succumbed to his selfish urges, ruling as a tyrant. To try and pull Gilga back to their side, the gods created Enkidu, a being made from mud. Enkidu was supposed to be the chains to bind Gilga to the god's favor, but instead found him to be a dear friend. They went on adventures together, which ultimately angered the gods. They punished Gilgamesh by killing Enkidu, turning his one true friend into dust. This really mellowed Gilgamesh out. He began to fear his mortality and went to the underworld in search of eternal life. There he obtained a potion of youth, but lost it to a snake that stole it while he was bathing. The ordeal enlightened him to accept his mortality and live as a human. He was a changed man. On his way back home, Gilgamesh had a premonition about Uruk's destruction, recording his vision in the Tablet of Destinies, leaving it in Kutha. In Uruk, he tells of his premonition and serves as a benevolent, wise ruler his people sincerely respect. Normally when you see Gilgamesh, he's in his archer form during the prime of his tyranny, but in this singularity he devotes himself to magecraft and is far kinder. That said, he still has his massive treasury, which just so happens to include the genuine Holy Grail, separate from the one Getia implanted. Anyway, he took many measures to protect his kingdom, including using his Holy Grail to summon none other than Merlin, Camelot's court mage. Much earlier in the series, I mentioned that Merlin had never actually died, and was instead trapped in the Tower of Avalon, so how on earth could he be summoned as a servant? Well, turns out it's possible for Merlin to summon himself independently, so long as it's during an era that precedes his existence. Thus, he worked with Gilga to manifest himself in the singularity as a caster. He'd been meaning to help humanity out, but could never truly interfere until this early era. Now Merlin, like a boss, actually managed to seal Tiamat within a dream, preventing her assault on humanity. Before she went into full slumber, however, Tiamat passed Getia's Grail onto an ally. In a hasty maneuver, Tiamat reconstructed Enkidu's fallen corpse and implanted it with both a soul and Grail, creating a new consort she named Kingu. However, this is not the same Kingu from Tiamat's past. They aren't even technically one of her children, and cannot hear her voice instinctively. Regardless, Tiamat made this new Kingu believe that they are her child, and tasked them with awakening her from her slumber. Kingu bought into this deceit, and acted according to Tiamat's will as her child, thought to be a superior breed of humanity. As with all other singularities, the Grail summons various free servants into the era. Turns out Medusa was summoned, but in a very unconventional manner. In Greek myth, Medusa was a beautiful goddess, unfairly punished by Athena to transform into a terrifying monster named Gorgon. Her tale is one of tragedy, as Medusa gradually became a bloodthirsty creature who devoured her own sisters. Yet Medusa herself isn't an evil person. Her life struggles were not the result of her own hubris or greed, but rather the fact that, unlike her sisters, she was born to age more. Thus, within the throne of heroes, there is a side of Medusa that represents her innocence and purity. When Medusa was summoned into this singularity, she was split into two separate servants. One was the monstrous Gorgon, her hateful side, and the other was Medusa Lily, her childhood innocence. Of the two, Kingu came upon Gorgon up north. Hoping to use Gorgon in awakening Tiamat, Kingu gave her Getia's Grail, granting Gorgon Tiamat's divinity. Gorgon inherited Potnia Theron, Tiamat's authority to conjure demonic beasts, and began to believe she actually was Tiamat. Of course, she's not, so her Potnia Theron wasn't perfect. In order to create demonic beasts, she first needed to abduct humans and then convert them into monsters. Thus, Gorgon headed to the Cedar Forest and established a blood fort, which functioned as a demon-creating factory of sorts. Meanwhile, Medusa Lily was also summoned into the Cedar Forest, supplying herself with mana by consuming the souls of slain demonic beasts. Gorgon's demonic beasts ventured south toward Uruk. To protect the city, Gilga ordered Babylon to be dismantled and reformed into a massive wall, sealing away the northern regions of Mesopotamia. In desperation, Uruk's sacred temple matrons sought further assistance, and went behind Gilgamesh's back to summon the goddess Ishtar. Now, we've been through this before. Gods in their true forms can't be servants. Heroic spirits aren't capable of containing the massive power of a divine being. For this to work then, Ishtar could only be summoned as a pseudo-servant, vicariously living through a human vessel. Turns out, Ishtar's ideal human counterpart happened to be the human magus Rin Tosaka. While this process killed them, the temple matrons succeeded at summoning Ishtar into Reen's body as a means of restricting the goddess's divinity. That said, who exactly is Ishtar? In essence, she's a revered Mesopotamian goddess of Venus, delegated to preside over the heavens. In legend, she went to Gilgamesh hoping to be his lover, but was rejected outright. Angered, she unleashed the divine bull Gugalana upon Uruk, which Gilgamesh and Enkidu managed to slay. This incident ultimately resulted in Enkidu's death at the hands of the gods. Despite being quite fearsome, having fought against the destructive Mount Ebi for not submitting to her will, many still worshipped Ishtar as an earth goddess of fertility. In honor of these believers, Ishtar roamed the farmlands to the north, protecting farmers and their cattle from demonic beasts, while occasionally returning to Uruk to torment Gilgamesh. Of course, this Ishtar is heavily influenced by Reen Tosaka's personality, especially in her obsession with fine jewelry. At the same time, the temple matrons accidentally summoned Ishtar's sister, Ereshkigal, as a servant. Opposite to her sister, Ereshkigal was assigned to preside over the Mesopotamian underworld, Kur. While she performed this duty well, it was tragic, as it meant she could not venture into the lush world above, and so Ereshkigal felt jealous of Ishtar's ability to soar the skies freely. Almost mockingly, Ishtar once ventured into the underworld to meet her sister, but found herself at Ereshkigal's whim. Ishtar had to pass through 7 gates, each time forced to remove a divine accessory. At the underworld's core, Ishtar kneeled before her sister, naked and vulnerable, and Ereshkigal tore her apart. With Reen's personality blended with both sisters, their rivalry is much more tame. Regardless, as in legend, Ereshkigal is still bound to the underworld and can only manifest on the surface occasionally through Ishtar's body while she sleeps. Thanks to Babylonia being a significant point in the Age of Gods, it's no wonder we're getting so many servants with divine qualities. Same goes for Quetzalcoatl, a Mesoamerican god who is summoned to the singularity in the body of a woman. Such is the nature for Mesoamerican deities, so it's safe to say she was sort of a pseudo-servant to begin with. Anyway, in history, Quetzalcoatl was both a benevolent and fierce god. On one hand, he disapproved of ritual sacrifice, and on the other, he fought rival gods, such as his sworn enemy Tezcatlipoca. Their battle ended in Quetzalcoatl's defeat, causing him to retreat to the planet Venus. After all, Mesoamerican deities originated from a meteorite that fell in the Yucatan Peninsula. It's thought that, because of Venus being attributed to a Greek goddess, Quetzalcoatl felt it fitting to emerge as a female servant. Now summoned, she displays an enthusiasm for lucha libre wrestling. To increase her divinity, she built a temple near the cities of Ur and Eridu, enshrining her noble phantasm, Piedra del Sol, at the altar. In an attempt to build an army, she threatened the people of Ur to send male sacrifices to Eridu, when in actuality she just had the men trained to fight for her. She was summoned alongside another Mesoamerican deity, Jaguarman, or Jaguar warrior. In ancient Olmec mythology, the Jaguar warrior was worshipped as a human-jaguar hybrid, a symbol of war and death. Other cultures worship Jaguarman as a guardian spirit called a Nagual, particularly the Nagual of Quetz's enemy, Tezcatlipoca. To exist as a servant, Jaguarman was summoned into the body of Taiga Fujimura, who happened to be the most compatible vessel with a link to the Grail. I think it's safe to say that Taiga's personality definitely influences Jaguar's behavior. Still, for as wild as she is, she actually acts as a subordinate to Quetzalcoatl, guarding the forest surrounding Ur and Eridu, protecting it from demonic beasts. With there being so many gods around, Kingu found it necessary to get on their good sides, and convinced Gorgon, Quetzalcoatl, and Ereshkigal to form the Three Goddess Alliance, which was essentially a ceasefire, so long as each of them stayed out of each other's business. The idea was to have each of the goddesses compete to decimate humans and destroy Uruk first, but thankfully Quetz and Ereshkigal had their own reasons for joining. Quetzalcoatl, for instance, wanted to empower humans to fight against Gorgon, so she used human sacrifice as an excuse to hide her rising army. Ereshkigal, while she certainly killed people to gather their souls in the underworld, only did so because she thought she could protect humans by caging their souls en masse. Thus, only Gorgon was actually aiming to end humanity. That said, the demonic beasts were no pushover. To fight them, Gilgamesh summoned an entire squad of heroic spirits, specifically Ushiwakamaru, Musashibo Benkei, Leonidas, Amakusa Shiro, Fuma Kotaro, Ibaraki Doji, and Tomoe Gozen. First, let's talk about Ushiwakamaru. also known as Minamoto no Yoshitsune. She was a famous Japanese military commander who grew up as a temple orphan, learned the art of war from a tengu, and devoted herself to her brother like a loyal dog in their war against the Taira. Despite her loyalty, she was fierce, supposedly missing a critical human element from how she grew up without her parents' love. This caused her brother, Yoritomo, to fear her, ultimately sending his forces to slay her. Benkei was Ushi's brave and loyal retainer, at least that's what the legends say. Fate puts an interesting twist on this whole concept, developing that, in reality, Musashibo Benkei never really existed. In truth, there was a man named Hitachibo Kaison who did indeed serve Ushi, but fled like a coward during her final battle. The shame and guilt for doing so overwhelmed him, such that he spent his life devoted to Buddhism, attaining a longer lifespan and assuming the identity of Benkei. During this time, he fabricated all the legends about Benkei, exaggerating his skill and bravery, which greatly influenced how people remember Ushi's story. This actually got him recorded into the Throne of Heroes as the Benkei of Legends. And while even Ushi's servant form reveres him as the legends dictate, he ultimately knows better. He is Kaison, the runaway, abusing powers earned from his lies. Harsh. Leonidas is the Spartan king most famous for holding back the Persians' massive army of 100,000 soldiers, with just 300 of his best men in the Battle of Thermopylae. He died a noble death, buying enough time for allied Greek forces to successfully repel the Persian army. Gilgamesh put him in charge of commanding and training Uruk's army against the demonic beasts at the northern wall. The other Japanese servants Gilgamesh summoned died prior to Chaldea's arrival. Shiro and Fuma were killed when scouting the jungle around Ur and Eridu. Ibaraki defected to the enemy and was likely slain in battle. And Tomoe gave her life in order to defeat the demonic beast's general, Girtablilu. I'd rather not linger on this too much, since none of them make an appearance in the story proper. What I do want to mention is that one of the wall's strongest defenses happens to be Gilgamesh's noble phantasm, Malamu Dingir, King's signal cannon, a balliste that fires bombardments of weapons from his treasury. To allow his soldiers to fire the cannons manually, lapis lazuli was embedded into their base. Shattering it with a hammer releases stored magical energy, firing the cannons. Without this, Gilgamesh would have to use a tremendous amount of his own mana to fire them. Merlin, while exploring the cedar forest, encountered Medusa Lily, who wanted to face her Gorgon self, but feared doing so. Merlin teamed up with her, tricking her into an agreement that sealed away much of her divinity until she's ready to take herself on in earnest. Until then, she hides her true identity, going by the name Anna. The fighting at the northern wall persisted for half a year, wiping out 80% of Mesopotamia's population, with 60% of its land falling to the Three Goddess Alliance. Needless to say, Chaldea's arrival can't come soon enough. Yup, we're just now getting to what happens in Episode 1. Chaldea tries to ray shift straight to Uruk, but because Uruk has a massive bounded field around it, the ray shift malfunctions, and they are instead dropped from the sky. Good thing Mashu is all about that defense. The two are almost immediately attacked by demonic beasts. In between fights, Ishtar frantically crash lands into Ritska. She's looking for something important, apparently. We're not supposed to learn of it till later, but I'm gonna reveal that she's on the lookout for Gugalana. You know, her gigantic bull of heaven. Turns out she lost it, which is indeed hilarious, but also harkens to an Easter egg, tying FGO to the unfinished light novel Fate Strange Fake. In that story, Gugalana is summoned from another world, which we can safely say is from the Ishtar of FGO's timeline. It's a big fan service inside joke that manages to impact the story. Anyway, she pieces out, and Kingu comes to save Ritska from even more beasts. But Kingu's the one enabling Gorgon to make the demonic beasts. Why would they kill them? Well, Chaldea's arrival is another potential threat to Kingu's plans, to Mother's awakening. But at this point, nobody knows that Kingu is an imposter Enkidu, so Kingu pretends to be Enkidu, fooling Chaldea's master into what is supposed to be their demise. Gullible enough, Ritska and Mashu follow Kingu north to the cedar forest, in the opposite direction of Uruk. Luckily, Merlin knows better, and they run into him en route to Gorgon's lair. He points out that whoever this is, they aren't the real Enkidu, and has Anna fight against them while he conjures an illusion used to escape. Free from danger, Merlin introduces himself and explains the bizarre circumstances behind his summoning. Let us not forget that Merlin is the man who tamed Kath Palug, another beast of humanity, aka our adorable pet Foe. While Foe is technically Merlin's familiar, that doesn't mean they necessarily get along. Anyway, Merlin properly escorts Ritska to Uruk's gate using Siduri's seal to gain entry. Siduri is first introduced here in FGO, but she's been Gilgamesh's most reliable assistant in all his kingship. She's been there for Gilga during his days of tyranny, and as his kinder self. She takes care of matters when Gilgamesh is away from the ziggurat. That said, Gilgamesh is now completely devoted to protecting his kingdom, and can almost always be found delegating manners from the throne. As such, he's quite busy when Merlin introduces Ritska. He tests Ritska's party in a brief fight, before declaring that he has a holy grail, but refuses to give it to Chaldea. Thankfully, it's not the grail we needed anyway. Ishtar, upset that Uruk's people follow Gilgamesh, occasionally attacks the ziggurat, making the people think she's one of the three goddesses in the alliance. Nope, she just really hates Gil. While Ritska, Mashu, and Chaldea don't realize that Anna is actually Medusa, Ishtar figures it out and flees. She might not be part of the alliance, but she doesn't want to start shit with the other goddesses either. With Ishtar gone, Gilgamesh doesn't seem all too thrilled about Ritska's arrival, and says he has no use for them. Siduri clarifies that Gilga just wants them to start by helping out Uruk's people in their daily lives, granting them lodging in the city. During this time, Ritska, Mashu, Merlin, and Anna all work to help the citizens, and celebrate with Ushiwakamaru, Benkei, and Leonidas who fight on the front lines. In particular, Ritska develops a strong friendship with Ushiwakamaru. They regale her with the stories they grew up hearing about her, and remark how they are more than just master and servant. It's really sweet. At the same time, they encounter and assist an old homeless man named Ziusudra. In Sumerian mythology, Ziusudra is the man who survived a great flood akin to Noah's biblical flood. However, the man Ritska meets is just borrowing the name. In truth, this man is actually King Hassan, the first man to hold the title of Hassan Isaba, leader of the Hashashin. This crazy skull-faced badass first made his appearance in Camelot, taking on Gawain, who was essentially invincible under light of the sun. Here, he's on more official business. By now we've seen all sorts of different assassin servants, but originally the class was reserved almost exclusively for the various generations of Hassan, making King Hassan the definitive assassin servant. As such, he is our first confirmed Grand Servant, summoned exclusively to fight the beasts of humanity. For the time being, though, he's just observing things until Tiamat awakens. Eventually, Gilgamesh recognizes Chaldea's hard work and gives them a mission to investigate the city of Ur to the south, which we know is surrounded by jungle. There, they come across Jaguarman, and even though she's very strong, she's difficult to take seriously. Ritska makes it through the jungle to Ur and finds its people thriving, or so it seems. Merlin figures out pretty quickly that they've been sending men to Eridu as human sacrifices, believing that doing so will maintain the jungle, which in turn will protect them from demonic beasts. Jaguar's been enforcing this logic, preventing the people from leaving the city. Ritska's party tries to fight her, but she's too strong, and they're forced to flee back to Uruk. For a change of pace, Gilgamesh asks Ritska and Mashu to accompany him to an observatory at the Persian Gulf. Kingu takes this as a chance to attack Gilgamesh, and their fight awakens latent memories of Enkidu's. Clearly, it seems that Kingu is struggling with their identity, not wanting to be defined by the body they inhabit. Another day brings another mission. We're off to Kutha to retrieve the Tablet of Destinies, the slab Gilga wrote his original prophecy on. When we arrive, we see that all of Kutha's people are dead, yet none of their bodies are wounded. Rather, they've all had their souls taken to Kur, the Babylonian underworld. Ritska too is nearly dragged in by the Galu spirits, but is saved by Ziusudra. Karma for the win, right? We find the tablet, only to be attacked by Ishtar. During our fight, the sun goes down, and she falls asleep quite abruptly. To take advantage of the situation, Merlin binds Ishtar with a lapis lazuli rope. When Ishtar wakes up, we try to interrogate her about the three-goddess alliance. What none of them realize, though, is that they're actually talking to Ereshkigal through Ishtar's body. According to her agreement with the alliance, Ereshkigal refuses to reveal the true names of the other goddesses, which Ritska respects. They let Ishtar go, under the reasoning that she truly does want Uruk's people to prosper. Because of this interaction, Ereshkigal takes a liking to Ritska. For our next mission, Gilgamesh orders us to head to the city of Nippur and evacuate its civilians to behind the wall. It's a joint operation with Ushi, Benkei, and Leonidas, who distract the demonic beast while Ritska's team goes in for evacuation. If there's one thing to know about Ushi, it's that she loves head pats, and she'll do a damn good job earning them. Problem is, the operation is a trap. Kingu saw it coming and had Nippur's people taken to Gorgon's lair. So instead of a rescue mission, we find ourselves struggling for our lives, not just against Kingu, but also Gorgon, who still introduces herself as Tiamat. Ushiwakamaru does a glorious job fending Gorgon off, but is ultimately defeated and taken captive by the enemy. As a final stand to keep Gorgon from the Northern Gate, Leonidas uses his noble phantasm, Thermopylae Enomotia, to protect the army from Gorgon's mystic eyes. Being a fellow Greek hero, Leonidas gives his life, not only saving his friends, but also revealing that Gorgon certainly isn't the real Tiamat. With their strongest defenses gone, Uruk is vulnerable, yet Kingu implores Gorgon to return to their lair, arguing that they'll have more chance to succeed once their army of demonic beasts is complete. This buys Uruk 10 days before Gorgon's return. We're saved for now, but it's bittersweet. We've lost our beloved Ushi, who was taken back to the demon beast's lair to be blackened by Gorgon's Potnia Theron. Benkei, once again failing to save his lord, admits he's just a coward and quits the Northern Army. Despite his death, Leonidas' soldiers in Ritska remember his teachings, taking a deep breath and refusing to give up. Even so, we're pretty desperate. Gilga thinks that if they can get Ishtar to help them, they can gain access to Gugalana. If only he knew. That said, what he does know is that Ishtar loves jewels. She's the kind of person who wears a broken lapis lazuli necklace, even though it's a demerit in combat, simply because she finds it beautiful. This is only compounded further by Reen's influence, needing jewels for her magecraft. So Gilga sends us off with a portion of his treasury to try and buy Ishtar's loyalty. The bribery is a success, and Ishtar joins our cause. As such, when it's night, Ritska will occasionally wind up talking to Ereshkigal during Ishtar's slumber, further deepening their bond. The switch is most apparent when she sneezes, revealing her blonde hair. Back at Uruk, Gilgamesh assumes that with Ishtar as an ally, Gugalana is in the bag. He then sets his sights on another useful tool to use against Gorgon, the Axe of Marduk. Earlier on, I mentioned how Tiamat fought her own children with 11 magical beasts. One of the gods fighting against her was Marduk, who wielded a massive axe against her. Turns out that axe is still sitting in Mesopotamia. Before we can go fetch it, however, Quetzalcoatl shows up in Uruk and presumably kills 100 humans, vowing to kill 100 more each day. Conveniently, the Axe of Marduk just so happens to be near Quetzalcoatl's temple at Eridu, so we head there to defeat her. In order to stand a chance, they need to destroy the Piedra del Sol, or Sunstone, that grants her more powerful divinity. Ritska makes their way to the Sunstone while the servants fight Quetzalcoatl and Jaguarman below, and once there, decides not to destroy it. Instead, Ritska refuses to believe that Quetzalcoatl is evil, and instead recklessly shows humanity's resolve by attempting a falling strike on her from the sky. Needless to say, the attack doesn't land, but Quetzalcoatl does catch them, and when Ritska declares she loves humanity, Quetzalcoatl and by association Jaguarman agree to join them in the fight against Gorgon. They find out Quetzalcoatl was never killing anyone. The men she captured from Ur and Uruk were all safe. Quetzalcoatl has a troop of winged servants to aid her, and she has them carry Marduk's axe by air to Uruk, instructing Jaguar to supervise the transport. Bizarrely, while we've been having this grand adventure in Eridu, Gilgamesh freaking died, in a similar manner to how others in Uruk have been dying. Their bodies are alive, yet their souls have been dragged off to the underworld. When we return, we decide that, to save Gilgamesh, we need to retrieve his soul from Kur. The underworld is, of course, Ereshkigal's territory, so her divinity triumphs over other gods there. Thus, the only goddess to join Ritska and Mashu is Ishtar, because she's admittedly been there before. Just like when Ishtar first descended, Ereshkigal passes judgment on those who try to pass through the 7 gates, except now it's almost a joke. Ereshkigal uses this as a chance to humiliate her sister, forcing Ritska to praise her at every gate. As a result, Ishtar grows smaller and smaller, to the point where she's useless by the bottom. Of course, midway, we find Gilgamesh, who doesn't actually need rescuing. After all, this isn't the first time he's visited the underworld. That said, while we're here, we might as well try and recruit Ereshkigal, so we descend to her palace. At this point, even though Ritska and Ereshkigal have secretly bonded vicariously through Ishtar, Ereshkigal doesn't think she can break her vow to the Alliance, and is afraid that Ritska will reject her true form as a Galu spirit, a cold, reclusive hermit of the underworld. Thankfully, Ritska is able to put these worries to rest, and she is defeated. She's actually freed from the three-goddess alliance when Ziusudra severs their bond. That's nifty. This guy's just like Shiki. Ultimately, while Ereshkigal can't leave the underworld, she does promise to help Ritska in the future. With that taken care of, it's time to take the fight to Gorgon before she can make the first strike. Problem is, Gorgon's lair is surrounded by a blood fort. The plan is to use Marduk's axe to destroy the blood fort so that Ritska's party can invade. The only one strong enough to yeet the axe is Quetzalcoatl, and she can't directly harm Gorgon or her territory while still bound by the alliance. Comedically, Merlin figures they can get around this by having Quetz instead toss the axe to him while he's right near the blood fort. Instead of catching the axe, he'll just miss and let the axe accidentally strike the fort. Fair enough. Reasonably though, the pact is harder to cheat than that. Even though this is the plan they go with, destroying the blood fort results in a severe penalty on Quetzalcoatl's authority. Given we're about to confront Gorgon for a definitive fight, we need to talk about Anna some more. She's always saying she hates humans, but this seems to be the result of her fearing their rejection. She doesn't want to let Ritska or Mashu know that she's Medusa, out of fear that they might see her as a monster. As such, she's been sternly denying part of herself. However, by actually meeting the people of Uruk, she was able to befriend an old woman who, as thanks for her help, gives her a beautiful flower crown. It's fair to say that the reason Anna now has the courage to face her monstrous self is because she wants to save people the way the old lady effectively saved her. Conveniently, Anna is perfectly equipped to defeat herself. She wields Arpe, the very blade that decapitated the Gorgon's head in legend. Finally facing herself, Anna is able to unleash her own mystic eyes of petrification, offsetting Gorgon's. The two fight, and Anna sacrifices herself to defeat Gorgon. Sadly, this too was yet another trap set by Kingu. They'd already taken the Grail back from Gorgon, and was merely awaiting Gorgon's death, which causes the real Tiamat to awaken. Tiamat finds Merlin in her dream and deals a fatal blow, destroying his spirit form. Now awake, Tiamat unleashes her authority, the Chaos Tide, to give birth to a new form of life, the Lamu named after her previous child. These nightmarish creatures emerge from the tide and begin to decimate everyone in the singularity. In no time, Ur is wiped out, and the Lamu head to Eridu. That said, while things aren't looking good for humanity, they also suck for Kingu. Kingu tries to join them in their assault, but is betrayed. The Lamu mock them, claiming that Kingu is just a tool to awaken Mother, and is no longer needed. Kingu was never meant to be the new humanity, so the Lamu stab them and steal back the Grail for Tiamat. Even worse, Siduri, who had left Uruk to try and help the people of Eridu, is attacked, and turned into one of the Lamu. As Kingu flees for their life, chased by the Lamu, Siduri manages to save them. Through her distorted cries, she explains that, even if Kingu is a different person, she doesn't want someone who reminds her of Enkidu to be hurt. She thanks Enkidu for being such a wonderful influence on Gilgamesh, before dying. The one Lamu that stole the Grail grew wings, and is taking the Grail back to Tiamat. Aw shit. Ritska's party gives chase on Quetzalcoatl's serpents. At the shore of the Persian Gulf, their pursuit is halted when the corrupted Ushiwakamaru attacks them, fully turned to Tiamat's side. Her spirit origin is mixed with the Chaos Tide, so even if they manage to defeat her, she continually emerges anew. As a result, the Lamu delivers the Grail to Tiamat, causing the sea level to rise, swallowing up most of Mesopotamia and turning the people into her new children. Ritska's attempt to fight Tiamat only makes her stronger. Even with Ishtar's noble phantasm, Angaltaki Galshe launched at full blast. Despite all this devastation, Gilgamesh remains optimistic because he believes he still has Gugalana as a trump card. Put on the spot, Ishtar crumbles and admits she lost the damn thing, and is once again labeled a useless goddess. Fortunately, there's a backup plan. They hope that if they can cause Tiamat to fall into the underworld, Ereshkigal's authority will be strong enough to defeat her. After all, Tiamat is a primordial goddess of life, and may be less effective in a land of the dead. Since Tiamat's headed toward Uruk, it makes sense to have Ereshkigal move the underworld directly beneath the city. Problem is, doing that will take years, and yet, Ereshkigal says that she can get it done in 3 days, because she's already been secretly planning to conquer Uruk, and was already mostly done. Yikes. So now our goal is to survive those 3 days, protecting the 500 people left alive in Sumer. Part of this is accomplished when Gilgamesh unleashes his secret project, the Fangs of Nepishtim, which are a wall of spikes that emerge around Uruk to hold the chaos tide at bay. That doesn't stop Tiamat herself, however, as she slowly heads their direction. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but Gilgamesh ensures that as long as Tiamat can be defeated, there's still hope for the singularity. All of his people are destined to die, but so long as legends of Uruk exist, history will be maintained. He winds up finding an injured Kingu before the final battle and gives them his personal holy grail, repairing their heart. Just like Siduri, Gilgamesh admits that he has a soft spot for Kingu, even if it's only for Enkidu's body. Just like how Enkidu defied the gods to be Gilgamesh's friend, Gilgo wants Kingu to have the choice of how to live their life. Ritska's team suspects that Tiamat can only walk because of the chaos tide carrying her thin legs. They believe that if they can take the tide out from under her, she will fall under her own weight. The party returns to fight Tiamat, but are once more stalled by Ushiwakamaru. Finally deciding to face his own cowardice, Benkei returns to take her on. While Ushi is able to attack with many copies, Benkei just so happens to have the perfect noble phantasm to counter it, the pilgrimage of the 500 Arhat. As a devout Buddhist, Benkei's noble phantasm summons 500 Arhat, Buddhist practitioners on the verge of achieving nirvana. On their pilgrimage, they bring those who would resist them along for the journey. Though Benkei takes a fatal wound from Ushi's blade, his noble phantasm is able to wipe both of them out completely. This gives Quetzalcoatl the chance to unleash Pietra del Sol, burning away the chaos tide beneath Tiamat's feet. While this is a resounding success, it appears Tiamat has multiple ways of traveling. Her two massive horns are actually wings, which she uses to take flight. In an attempt to stop her takeoff, Quetzalcoatl is knocked into the tide. The mission has failed, and Ritska must escape with the servants they have left. To ensure this, Medusa re-emerges, her Gorgon form fully reconciled. By fully accepting herself, putting aside the fear of being seen as a monster, Anna returns with the Gorgon's powers to restrain Tiamat. She uses Gorgon's noble phantasm, Pandemonium Cetus, to completely unleash her monstrous strength, fracturing Tiamat's right horn at the cost of her life. Even then, it's still not enough to stop Tiamat's flight to Uruk. If anything, the attempt only made things worse. When Tiamat arrives in Uruk, Gilgamesh is ready for her. With no more soldiers to fire his dingir, he activates them using his own mana. As Ritska regains the will to fight, Tiamat tries to snipe them from a distance, and Gilgamesh takes the hit. Even so, on the brink of death, he continues to bombard Tiamat. At the same time, Kingu decides to embrace Enkidu's memories and enters the fight against their mother. They unleash Enkidu's noble phantasm. Their true form is the chains of heaven. Both Gilgamesh and Kingu sacrifice themselves, just barely buying enough time for Ereshkigal to finish positioning Kur beneath the city. With yet another blast of Ankalta Kigalshe, Ishtar opens a hole below Tiamat, forcing her down to the bottom of the underworld. Tragically, the belief that Tiamat's power would dwindle in the underworld was false. Her chaos tide continues to spread, now simply corrupting Kur along with everything else. Even worse, Tiamat transforms again, this time into her true bestial form. Things seem at their worst, with the tide flooding everything it touches. But in our time of need, there is hope, and it comes in the form of a fantastic dick wizard. The Merlin who died earlier was just him as a heroic spirit. His actual body was still alive in Avalon. Due to the impact of having a beast of humanity active, he was able to find the chance to escape the tower and go to Ritska's aid. He shows up just in the nick of time to purify the chaos tide with a field of flowers. Now, I have to admit, this really feels like a case of plot armor. Oh well, Tiamat was already pulling this kind of crap anyway, and she's about to do it again by flying. Turns out, the real reason they've been unable to defeat Tiamat is because she has no concept of death. She is a primordial being of life, no matter where you place her. Not even the gods of Mesopotamian legend could kill her, even after lopping her into two pieces and discarding her to the void. In order to kill her, she needs the concept of death forced onto her. And who better to do that than old Gramps, who just now decides to intervene. Ziusudra reveals himself as King Hassan, the Grand Assassin, and leaps into the underworld, slicing off Tiamat's wings and imposing death onto her. Now killable, Tiamat desperately fights for her life by summoning 11 Lamu as strong as her original magic beasts. She also invokes Nega Genesis, her attempt to recreate everything around her. Merlin teams up with Ereshkigal to seal its expansion, Ereshkigal in particular using her noble phantasm, Uruk-Kigal Irkala, the shrine given to her by Nergal. Unfortunately, this is the end for Ereshkigal. She broke a critical rule in helping the living, and all of this overexertion causes her to vanish. She fears having to meet Ritska again in her true form, without Reen's body, but she recalls Ritska's kindness and accepts her fate. Ritska takes this chance to rush in and strike Tiamat's head, during which they confront her true feelings. This effectively serves as Tiamat's farewell. To deliver a final blow, however, Gilgamesh returns, not as the self that died buying time for the underworld, but as his archer heroic spirit form. He unleashes the full might of his noble phantasm, the reality-bending sword Ea, launching Enuma Elish to completely obliterate Tiamat. Again, plot armor all the way. Sometimes Nasu crawls so far up his own ass that no forceps can reach him, but if you're still enjoying his work, you're probably used to seeing these outrageous ass pulls. It does look pretty cool anyway, and actually does have somewhat of an explanation. That is, before Gilgamesh died, he summoned his archer form just like he did for Ushi and the other servants in the Singularity. Of course, you'd think that he could have teamed up with himself, perhaps not dying in the first place, but whatever. Perhaps we can just blame it all on Archer Gil's arrogance. Anyway, back on the surface, Merlin gives us the grail he grabbed right from Tiamat's throat at the last moment. Nice. Jaguarman was able to save Quetzalcoatl when she fell into the tide earlier. Double nice. Merlin and Hassan were only able to appear in the first place because of the beast's presence, so they peace out, leaving Ritska and Mashu to return to Chaldea, successfully resolving the Singularity, just as Gilga had promised. The impact his kingdom had on the world was more important than the continued survival of all its people. It sucks, but it shows the sheer bravery of Gilga's soldiers and citizens, who knew all along they'd meet this fate. So, with all 7 singularities resolved, and all 7 Getia Grails in tow, we should be able to take on the demon god Hivemind on fair terms, or fairer terms anyway. Then they can finally learn the truth of King Solomon. Look forward to it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this channel, help me beat the algorithm by liking, commenting, and sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and most of all, smashing that notification bell as if it were your waifu. That way you'll never miss out on all of my anime content, lore videos, live streams, and Holy Waifu Wars polls. My vids are struggling to get featured, so that bell is absolutely critical. If you want to support me directly, check out my Patreon, or consider donating via Super Chat. And as always, celebrate your fandom.